All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you're joining us from. I see we have folks from all over the world today, which is really exciting. I'm Caitlin Barnard. I'm part of our developer marketing team here at Kong, and I'm excited to welcome you to today's user call on custom plugins. I see a lot of you have already been testing out the chat functionality. Please feel free to use that if you have any comments or technical issues throughout the presentation. Otherwise, please drop all of your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. That'll help us keep track of everything, and we're going to make sure to leave some time for questions at the end. This session is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording via email. So with that, let's get started, and I'll hand it over to you, Lakesh, to kick us off.
All right. Thanks, Caroline. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Right. I started. A quick introductions about myself. My name is Lokesh Chuchani. I am here as a principal engineer with Kong. So I primarily work with the customer experience team, so more or less strategic customers. I live in London. I think here are my details on the screen. So if you want to drop in some comments or anything about this session, or would like to know more about Kong, yeah, please feel free to reach out. Okay, so let's start it. Let's start. I know we have very packed agenda, but I'll try to be more, more engaging and more hands-on. Let's see how it goes. So that's why I've just keep the Q&A at the end. So I'll spend like 10 minutes with the Q&A if you have any questions around that. So what we're going to talk about today is just have a little bit recap on the API gateway and the Kong, its modular architectures. Then we deep dive into a custom plugin, how the custom plugin, fit all together in gateway. And recently there is a new technology coming in, very handy, WebAssembly. So we spent some time to understand that as well, and we'll end up with some Q&A at the end. Right, let's get started. So again, before we jump into the weed, let's spend a very, do a very quick recap around what is an API gateway. It's important to understand that, when we talk about the custom plugin and plugin, how they work. So let's spend a very quick 2 minutes to understand it. So being an API gateway, if you see it's primarily nothing, is like a man in the middle right now. It's a reverse proxy between your API consumer and your API producers, and it does more a lot of things. Is sort of like asking about like doing some authentications, saying that, okay, do you have a right level of authentications like a token or API key before you execute those API. Along with side, it also can do sort of things like RBAC, role-based access control. It's just making sure that is this something real who you claim to be. And when it comes to comes to these API gateway, these policies is basically within the Kong are the plugins. That's why it's very important to know that how the API gateway works primarily on the Kong side. Right, so if I quickly talk about Kong, it's being an open source API gateway. I think we have like a most biggest open source community from the API gateway perspective. One of the thing Kong does is, and it's very, very popular from the customer perspective, is to everything we deploy within the Kong API gateway is via the declarative file. So what that enables the customer is around they can adopt like GitOps, DevOps framework while deploying the API gateway policies. And then again, we are cloud agnostic, so we can the gateway can deploy it into any cloud. And we support like a multiple protocol like HTTP, UDP, TCP, etc. And those policies can apply via plugin. And another thing is the main thing about the Kong API gateway is the performance, and I'll talk about it in a bit. and why it's because of its design, why it's so performant. And everything in the Kong API gateway, the gateway policies is executed by its out of the box plugin, and as well as the custom plugins. So, as I mentioned that, the performance for the Kong is derived from the technology which is built on. So for the Kong is the entire stack is built on the Nginx. And Nginx, I'm sure everybody knows about it. It's very well known for its performance. I guess if you look at back into the days, right, when the Apache web servers, right, they have particular way of handling those concurrent requests, right? They use the single threaded model where every concurrent request is basically your thread, and which primarily has a very bottleneck of your when it's scaling up, like multiple like concurrent requests. So each thread can have like lead to a memory problem, right? Because they consume the memory and the CPU. And when Nginx comes into the pictures, it handles that particular problem in a very smart way by introducing sort of like an async socket API. And also on the request and response, it's provide the event-based model. So what I mean is in the single thread, different events. For example, your access phase or content, those are events will be executed for the multiple requests into the single thread. And that's why it's like it's so performant that even in the multiple concurrent users with the small resource, it can execute that. And hence when it comes to the Kong, it basically what Kong does is it embeds the entire the API gateway management as well as the plugin ecosystem on top of the Kong by leveraging the OpenResty. So one thing I would say is the when it comes to the Kong, everything handled on a particular language called Lua. The reason is being that is because the Nginx is completely written in the C, right? And from the Kong, we have to come up with a language where we need to have, provide some sort of like a business, a developer friendly language, right? Which they can write some sort of a transformations or some sort of authentications where it's very hard to write into a C based, but we also need to have a language which can give the performance as good as the C. So that's why the Kong is being entirely written into Lua, and which use the Lua JIT compiler, which is like one of the fastest compiler in the world, right? It just execute your Lua file the way it is, like, there is no like a compiler, like, your source code is basically execute as is via the Lua JIT. So in and all, if you see that you have like, Nginx, which is your, a web server, and then provide the event-based modeling, and then the Lua. So, what we're saying is that we have the performance as good as the Nginx, but also we have some way of writing those modules and policies and the etc. into a Lua, which is, a certain way provide a developer-friendly language. And why we're talking about that is because each plugin is itself a Lua module, which is run natively within with the Lua JIT and in the Nginx ecosystem. And also, I'll show in a bit how that modules are hooked up with the different phases. Right. So if I quickly summarize around the entire stack of the Kong, is the top layer is Kong is an applications, right, which natively written into Lua, and it's leveraged the OpenResty framework, because OpenResty framework provide a like sort of a hook with the with the Nginx web server, and at at the bottom, like the Nginx is sits which provide the like a backbone of the entire stack. Right. Okay, so that's sort of like a introductions around Kong is modular architectures and how the Kong plugins sit into that architecture. Um, Now let's talk about the custom plugin, which is in a way extending the existing, extending the functionality where any of the Kong plugin doesn't fit, but at the same time leveraging the native way of executing the plugin. So one of the things, if many customer ask me that why we need a custom plugin, right? When we have a lot of plugins present into the Kong. Um, one of the key requirement which I've seen with the customer where they need a custom plugin is to sort of, providing integration with their third-party system. Like for example, they wanted to integrate with their Salesforce or with their any of their in-house system where they need the API gateway to be integrated. That's where this custom plugin comes into handy. Also certain cases, right, they wanted to have some level of logic backed into the gateway where the existing plugin doesn't provide, and that's where the custom plugin comes into the picture. What I usually do is I'll go and tell the customer is we do have like a sort of like hundreds of plugins written via Kong and also via our community. So usually go and look into the existing plugin if that doesn't support it, and then go with the custom plugin route. But I think most of the customer, they have somewhere or another some requirement where we need to go with the custom plugin. Um, we do have towards the bottom, we do have a lot of out of the box plugin which is categorized into the various area, which is like towards the authentication, security, your traffic control, transformations, of course, logging and analytics, etc. So those plain vanilla plugin that serve a lot of the requirement which customer comes into it. Right. Now, if we talk about how this custom plugin works, right? How this policy execute when the request is land onto the Kong. One of the thing which key differentiate us is the custom plugins run within the same process as our inbuilt plugin runs. So there won't be any like a performance overhead when you build a custom plugin. And the custom plugin is sort of deployed as in a same fashions where our existing plugins are being deployed. So that's why they sit together with the existing plugin. And those custom plugins can be applied to various Kong entities. So let me give you a quick flavor around what are these Kong entities. I'm sure people here in the call knows bits and pieces around it, but in a way, what we're saying is there are primarily three core entities within the Kong that represent your APIs, right? One is your consumer, which represent your API consumer, and then the route, which is your API endpoint, if I say so, and then your services, which sort of your backend upstream service. And then this plugins is basically can apply to any level, like to your consumer, so you wanted to apply some specific policy to your consumer, to your route, to your services, and to the globally as well. We will see in the demo that how you can apply to a different level, um, uh, and just have a more granular control around that. And when it comes to the custom plugin, it's just kind of the same way your inbuilt plugin applies to. So if I just draw around that, where this custom plugin fits into the whole architecture, where the Kong comes into it, it's basically fits it at the same level where our existing plugin fits. So what I'm saying is that it just leverages the same Lua jet and same processes where your existing plugin is executed, and that gives it a sort of like a native run of the custom plugin. So sometimes the customer asks, "Hey, I'm building a custom plugin. Would there be any performance impact?" And then I sort of go and explain them the custom plugin is yet another Nginx module which will be running within the same compiler. Right. So now I think the another aspect is to, yes, we the custom plugin can be deployed and can be set together with the existing plugin, but how does it interact with the Kong, with eventually the Nginx, events, different phases. It's very important that to understand this, that gives us a clear view around that, when you execute the plugins, at what point of time these plugins start executing during the request lifecycle or during the response lifecycle. So on the screen, as I mentioned before, the Nginx primarily follow the eventing based model, right? So every event is, sort of the execute via Lua functions, what we call as a Lua module. And they are, primarily categorized into sort of a different phases. One is a request access phase, and then the content phase, and then the log phase. So if I just, put sort of an abstractions around that, the request and access phase is nothing but, when the request land onto the Kong, before it's just, proxying onto your upstream, that's where all your request phases, the request, the Lua module, which is falls under this phase, would start executing it. Similarly, while sending back the response, the module which present into the content phase, that will execute. So for example, your header filter or body filter, they start executing. So things like, for example, if you wanted to enrich some response header or response body before sending the response back to your consumer, then those kind of logic you would be building into the Lua module, which is tied to your content phase, which is we call as a response phase, the response lifecycle. And then the last one is the log phase. It's also pretty important because the log phase is when all our logging plugins, like file log or HTTP log, etc., they will be executed via log phase. One of the thing, again, from the Nginx perspective, is differentiate us is the log phases execute when the last response byte is sent back to your API consumer. What that means is this logging phase will not have any latency impact on your request, because it just start executing when the last byte of the response delivered back to your API consumer. Right. So if I little bit, give you a view around that, how this phase, fit together when I develop a plugin, right? Because what I need to, what I need to know, because as a developer, you won't be sort of writing your Lua code directly into this module, but you would be leveraging our Kong, what we call as a PDK, like plugin development kit, and leveraging these are the methods which I've listed here while developing the plugin. That way, again, if you think about that, that's why one of the reasons, using the Lua, right? If I would have been using the C, then it would be like light nightmare to to build a custom plugin, because it'll be a lot of boilerplate code and very native, not like a business friendly language where we need to implement certain logic. So these are the various, like, if I talk about in the developer language, these are the various methods you would be end up with implementing it when you build any custom plugin. So during that, if I talk about the if I talk about like how we categorize this method into various phases and also various level. So there is something also called init phase, which is primarily what it does is, if you wanted to initialize something, because that is not attached to your request and response lifecycle. That's why it wasn't there in the previous diagram, because this is slightly different, where when the Nginx initialized, or say about the Kong initialized, this will be executed just on the single time. So that's why it's attached to a particular work or particular CPU core. So if you wanted to, for example, initialize your, say, database configurations or any static configurations, then this is where the place is got. So that's why this is scoped at the application level rather than the request level. And then these primarily these three Lua module, Lua functions, which is attached to your request lifecycle. That means while we're processing the inbound request, and then the remaining these two module will be attached to your response lifecycle. So when we are sending back the response back to the consumer. So anything, it's very important to know that which particular method I need to write my logic, like custom logic or anything I need to do, so that you are aware whether it be executing during the request phase or during the content phase. And if you wanted to do anything for the logging, like injecting any custom field or removing something or something which is not supported by our logging plugin, then you will be end up with writing into the log phase. So so in a nutshell, if I go back to it, is how we are simplifying for you is that on a day-to-day, as per the developer, you won't be like dealing with the Nginx or OpenResty directly, but instead you would be more understanding the Kong, where what are its different phases, writing your plugin to Lua, understanding the Kong PDK, which extend the low-level Nginx library. So that makes extending the Kong functionality more easier when it comes to the development. Right. So I think the providing a right set of tooling for a developer with which accelerate a lot of things which developer doesn't need to deal with it, because I know Lua is a very primitive language, but I think within the Kong we have certain tooling which also like open source available. So if a developer can adopt those tools, that mean developing the custom plugin into the Lua would become more easy. There are two key development tools which I suggest most of the customer. One is to use the Pongo. Pongo is the tool which our engineering team built in-house. It provides like sort of like integrating ecosystem to test your custom plugin. So it provides sort of like, an ability to do your integration test, your unit test. You can also do like, linting of your Lua files, just to make sure that when you have this into your automation pipeline, you can easily make sure that, your plugin is adhere to your standards, and it's also run all the test. And the good thing about the Pongo is it's a container based, so you can easily integrate into your CI/CD, and you just spin up the container and execute the tool, and just you can bring it down. And the another the scaffold, the plugin template, which we created as like a good practice repo, which give you like something to start with on the day one, which give you like a scaffold of how the plugins the Kong plugin should be structured, because there is a specific structure where you need to adhere to when you build a custom plugin. And this template is again give you an ability to start with something, so you don't like fiddle around like, hey, where's my file going, why it's not executing it. So I usually recommend these two development tools when you build a custom plugin. And I think there are certain like VS Code, Visual Studio Code extension, I'm sure like you'll find in your favorite IDE, which can support your Lua, like as a syntax highlighting and etc. Okay, so when we build the custom plugins, I think there are certain structure, as I mentioned, we need to adhere to, and that's why it's important to understand that what are the different files need to present in the custom plugin, and what we call as a plugin module, basically. So this is where when Kong execute for a certain policy, like execute your functions during a specific cycles, it's nowhere to find those Lua module in those files. So primarily what we're saying is there are two files which are mandatory. One is handler.lua, and the handler.lua is contains like it is a core interface to implement. So it contains all your phases, like as we your request phase, like access phase, and then the content phase, like and plus the log phase. So all your custom logic will goes into this particular file. And then there is this file called a schema.lua. I think don't confuse with the database schema. It's not a database schema. It's a sort of like a plugin schema. When you perhaps seen any Kong plugin where you have some sort of like a configurations, right? A plugin have like anything you wanted to externalize certain configurations, and if you provide a schema around that plugin configuration, this is where it goes, right? So it's good to have that some level of configurations for the plugin, and you can supply some validations rule around it. Next three files are very specific to the use case. One is, for example, this DAOs, which if you have sort of a very custom requirement, you wanted to have some sort of like a creating a new tables or holding the data via the plugin, and this is where you need to implement those data access object Lua module. And that's how the Kong will know that which tables to create and how this plugin would be integrated to read and write from those tables. So very specific. I haven't seen like any such use case as of now, but it is there for the for any complex scenarios. Then the API.lua, where you would, if you need to expose some sort of like a administrator endpoint via this custom plugin, then you probably need to, then you would need to implement that API.lua. The last one is migrations. Of course, if your plugins is dealing with the with the database table, then it needs to provide those schema files so that during the bootstrap, Kong can create those database tables. Yeah, so I think to start with, it's a good to understand the key file which important to implement the plugin is handler.lua. and I'll show you in a bit, like, what it contains when we just, clone this template repository. Right. So once we, develop the plugin, build the plugin, we, test with the Pongo, and we are satisfied with, the plugin does what it does. The next thing is to know how do we install the plugin. And then if you remember that, I've said that the plugin basically sits, the custom plugin sits exactly the same place where our, the Kong existing plugin sits. And the and what that and that means the installations of this custom plugin is go hand in hand. How are we deploying the Kong? So Kong can be deployed, in a many ways, right? You can deploy it onto VM as in like directly, on your operating systems, or in a container or in a Kubernetes. So when you you deploy the Kong directly onto VM on operating systems, then you would be just installing this plugin via LuaRox, and then LuaRox comes handy within the Kong itself. So you don't need to install the LuaRox, but the LuaRox should be present in your host system where the Kong is installed. So all you need to do is just take the rock file. Rock is like I won't say the binary, but it's like a packaged file, a artifact, which is what the plugin contains, and you just install via LuaRox. Just like in I think in a world of Java, it's like a sort of jar file, if you can think from that perspective. For the Docker, you can create the custom Docker image, and you just mount the plugin file into the Docker volume. So it just read so that LuaJIT just read the file, the Lua file, and execute it. And that's where the beauty comes, right? Because the LuaJIT compilers is execute the file just like your source code. And that's why if you mount the file onto your Docker volume, all you just need to know is just to read those files. And then the Kubernetes is simplified a lot, and which we will see in our demo is all you need to do is just create a config map or secret in your Kubernetes cluster, and just point the Kong, say, hey, look, this is where my custom plugin is deployed, and you just start reading those config map and executing it. I think from the best practice perspective, I recommend customer to create a custom image. The reason is that when you have like a big enterprise customer, it's very useful to have a versioning of your plugin against with versioning of your Kong. So they both should go hand in hand, and creating the custom image will give you that ability, because otherwise, if you create, like, for example, config map, and then it will be very hard to say which version of the plugin goes with which version of the Kong I'm delivering into it. So and also, if you go from the container perspective, all the executable code should be inside the container. They should not outside of the container. So that's where it's better to create a custom image out of it. Right. I think the next thing is about, like, how are we like, I've seen the customer where they create a lot of custom plugins, right? And one of the things they always ask is how are we deliver those custom plugins, because we wanted to have some sort of automations around it. So absolutely, you can deploy the plugin via pipeline, and this pipeline can also, just like how are you deploying the microservices, right? Simple as that. So you can of course maintain your plugin into your any source repo, and then if it just follow your GitOps pipeline, your DevOps cycle, whatever concepts you are using in your organizations. But you can use the tooling which I recommended. One of the key tool is to use the Pongo, where it provides a testing capability for your plugin. And at the end, as I said, you can build your while delivering into it, you can build your golden image and you can tag that golden image. Like, when I say golden image, it's sort of like, deploying the custom plugin in over the Kong image, and then install that into your host system. And we've been very successful around achieving the automations on the custom plugin. Right. So this is very interesting, but till now I was only talking about the Lua, but always the customer comes back and says, okay, I know Lua is not that popular, although it's very popular on the different side of the world. But um, primarily, when we talk about like a sort of a the customers where they more over like fall into enterprise and business side of things, they wanted to have more developer friendly languages. And they always talk about like, do we have a plugin development into other language? So there is a PDK, there is a development kit for Go and JavaScript and Python. And then so trying to say that there is an ability to develop the Kong plugin into a different language, but it also come up with its own overhead. One of the overhead, again, which gives Lua over and so the overhead which the other languages against the Lua is the speed, because the for the other languages they don't run natively within the same process as Lua, because the Lua install as a Lua module, whereas if you write in Go, Python, or JavaScript, they will be run as a separate process. So there is a cost attached to it, in terms of performance when you choose the plugin development into a different language. So my argument with the customer always go around that, why we choose Lua over the other language. One of the thing I explain to the customer is it's not about learning the Lua is hard. It's about like 60% of the time you would be learning around the Kong, its PDK, how the different like Lua module integrated with the Kong, and then rest of the understanding the tooling around the Lua, and then the remaining bits and pieces is understand the language. Because the if you think from that, our scope is very narrow, right? We are building a custom plugin which is for the API gateway. So, and for that reason, I think within the Kong we have a very like a community support, and there are a lot of toolings available, and there is a lot of like supports available. The ecosystem is very huge as against as against to a different language. But yes, you would find a lot of set of libraries, right? For example, if you wanted to implement the HTTP client or some sort of, and then you'll find a huge set of libraries as against to Lua. But when it comes to toolings and supports and etc., you'll find more supports in Lua as against to Go. And also when becomes the choices are limited, it's very easy to make a decisions around it and go for it, because everybody would be using that particular libraries. So I think when you decide to build a custom plugin, have a think through around it, that which language I should go about it. Whether do I need to like go with the a language other than Lua, or should I just stick to the Lua and just so have a same performance as our inbuilt plugins. And I think because the Kong is entirely built on Lua, so I don't think so you'll find a use case where something is not available in Lua, where it's available in Kong. I'm sure I've been with Kong for almost 4 years, and I haven't seen any use case where they say there is nothing. This thing is not available in Lua. So you'll always find something because our scope is very, very limited. Right. Certain best practice while implementing the custom plugins. This is something we come up with is to, in general, if your, for example, handler.lua, your script file is becoming too big, it's very common, you know, um, common way of developing, not just the Lua, is to break it down. Another one is to always have a configuration driven, right? So the more you make your custom plugin flexible, when the requirements is evolve, you don't need to, go and change your plugin every time. When you extend your existing Kong plugin, for example, if you are extending our existing, like, enterprise plugin like Keyot or Odyssey or whatever, then, try to use a different name because the otherwise they will be clash with each other. Similarly, rename database table and cache the key to prevent collision if you are implementing the custom plugin which deal with the database table. Or, yeah, don't use the same one. Pretty standard when it comes to testing. Develop the any comprehensive unit and integration test and use the Pongo to run your test and make sure that it's very well tested. We also recommend customer to use some sort of like performance tooling, so that just to make sure that adding this custom plugin will not add up any performance issues. Yeah, and there are certain aspect around when it comes to how are you using a different object. For example, there's plugin context object. So rather than creating like a global variable, you just use there is certain context object which Kong provides out of the box. So try to leverage that. And you basically, when you build the custom plugin, you would know that these are the objects are available. Always use the caching when you deal with the database entity, because there is something called a Kong.cache object. So that gives you a very nice way of integrating and also handling the cache. um, so you don't need to manage the cache by yourself. Use the Redis as a shared cache when you scale it out to different nodes. So again, this is just like one of the common list, but I'm sure being as a developer, you would know um, more when it comes to the building the custom plugin. Um, these are like a quick snippet on the custom plugin which is available on our Kong hub. So one of the things is that the Kong inbuilt shift with like a lot of plugins which is there within the Kong binary. You don't need to install it separately. And all these plugins are listed into our Kong Hub website. So if you go into our Kong plugin hub, Google it, click on the first link, and you will see all the plugins which is available into the as a part of Kong, Kong binary. They are listed there. Right. So just check on the time. I know we already have 40 minutes, so I'll very quickly give you a very quick demo around, when you build the custom plugin, what is the first thing you do and how you deploy it. So I hope the demo code is with me and it works. So the first thing I show is, there is a one the Kong plugin template, and whenever you start writing any custom plugins, I highly advise just to leverage this GitHub template and just to create your project out of it. So if I just very quickly create a new repository around this plugin, and I just says Kong. I guess if I available. So what I did, primarily just created my repository out of that template. So it gives me a basic structure, like a skeleton, and also not just the skeleton, it just gives you like a ready-made a plugin, which is you can just basically just execute it. If I just go into my my command line, and if I do git clone, I guess I do have the command available. Yeah, so quickly cloning this this repository into my local, and then I'll show you a different phases here. Okay, so sorry. Good. Go. Quickly going into my Visual Studio so I can show you what the structure look like for this plugin. So as I said, there are two key files for this plugin. One is handler and one is schema. And if you go to the handler.lua, you will see all these phases, like, init worker, the access phase, the header filter, body filter, etc. So what that means is that this by using this template, it gives you like a nice structure, and all you need to do is just start implementing the business logic which you need. So here what I'm doing is I am sort of setting the header into the request, when the request goes to your upstream, like backend, and also on the while back I'm setting the particular header onto it. Right. So I think if I quickly go and deploy this plugin with my Kong, so I have the Kong instance running on my local, and so to do that, let me just create one quick a services and route in the Kong, and I'll show you, with plugin and without plugin how it does work. So what I'm doing right now is I'm creating one service called HTTP bin with my local instance with a Kong, and I'm attaching a route for that service. So if I quickly show you into the visualizations onto my Kong, is just to get you around that there is a services present, and then and there isn't any plugin involved around it. So we and I just say, for example, if I go to my gateway service here and show you that add new plugin, and there isn't any like a custom plugin attached into it. So in order to install that custom plugin, it's very straightforward. All we need to do is just I'm just using a Kubernetes way of deploying into it. So all I need to do is just create a Kubernetes secret for that plugin. So one of the things for that we need to know is we need to go into a right directory to create the plugin. So the config map should be created at the my plugin directory level. So hsk.create config map. Sorry, I need to go into that project. Hey, Kong and plugins, and think it's already there. So let me delete it. And yeah, so once I've just created the config map, all I need to do is just in my the way I'm installing the Kong, I just need to instruct that these are the plugins already present as a config map, and for that I think all you need to do is just update your Helm chart. Simple as that. So if I quickly go and show you here in my Helm chart, yeah, these are the lines. So if you have multiple plugins, all you just need to do is have those many of config maps and mount those config maps into the Helm chart. So I'm just naming my plugin name as my plugin, and then instructing the Kong to be where to look in which config map. And if I just I don't know why this error is coming in. Yeah, and then I've just upgraded the Kong because I've updated the Helm chart so that it knows it just load those plugin into it. Okay. Yeah, perfect. Quickly go and see my board. It's just yeah. So it just run, and let's have a quick view around that. I'll refresh this one and go to my workspace, and if I go to my services, and let me try to install a plugin onto this one. Yeah, if you can see, that's as good as I can have my plugin enabled on that particular service. And if I enable it and install this plugin against that particular service, I should be able to basically see what I'm doing in that plugin, which is basically setting the request and response headers. So if I access my service here with anything as an endpoint which I've created, I should be able to basically see few more headers being added, like a hello world and bye world in the response. And this is coming as a part of response, and this is when I'm just proxying the request back to the upstream. So basically what I'm trying to highlight is the installing the plugin is not as difficult as it used to be. If you are using the Kubernetes, it's very straightforward to install the install via config map. Right. So I think in interest of the time, oops, sorry, I've just stopped sharing my screen. I'll go back to my presentations and very quickly show you around the another module, which is a new feature coming up as a part of new release Kong 3, where we have the WebAssembly is coming in. Because one of the things where customer is always demanding is around that, okay, even though we wanted to have a same capability as a Lua, but still wanted to execute with another languages, how do we do that, right? Rather than executing as a separate process. And that's where the WebAssembly comes very handy. This feature is still in beta, it's still in tech preview. So I will share the link at the end if you wanted to go and have a play around it. But what it does is basically I'll quickly skim it through around its architecture. So what Kong does is basically install the WASM VM, the WASM-X, again, yet another Nginx module as a WASM-X, which Kong has built. And then any module which WASM-X module that you run, which run as a filter, which gives you an ability to run into the same in-process flavor which your custom plugins is run. So if I go back and quickly show you where, say, for example, if you write your the WASM filter in your favorite language, at the end you create a WASM module out of it, and you just deploy the WASM module onto the Kong gateway, and then the Kong gateway execute this WASM module as a WASM filter via the proxy WASM. So again, sorry, I'm going too fast because I'm interested of the time. We already have 2 minutes, but again, have a go. I'll share this link with you. There's a good, very active project going on within the Kong. Is to have the WASM-X, because once the WASM-X comes in very handy, it's basically changed the way we are executing the filters and we are executing the API policies. So have a go, have a play around it, and we always look for looking for any feedback for this beta feature. Right. I'll stop here, and I think I'll let's spend maybe spare few minutes for any question and answer you have. Any questions? Sorry. I think the first questions I have, please share the PDK setup and bundling of the schema file. So that's an anonymous user. I think I will share the Kong plugin template link. So that has everything. And that also give you a like initial structure of your handler file and schema file, and you can start using it. And this session is recorded, so you probably can use the screenshot of that one. Yes, for the connect data plane, the connect is our SaaS module, but for the connect, it's installed into your control plane and data plane both. So for that reasons, there is an ability. I mean, in this one, we primarily cover the Kong Enterprise, which is on-prem versions. But in the Connect, you can install the custom plugin. Like on the data plane, you can install the way I have installed in the demo. But on the control plane, you have an ability to do it via the UI, the Connect UI. Right. And then I think Dominic asked if the plugin requires a dependency that is hosted on the LuaRx, but your company doesn't allow fetching this. Right. It's a very interesting questions, and thanks for asking, Dominic. I guess what probably in that case you would need is you need to bring those Lua modules or Nginx modules into your container or into your host system. So you externally needs to install those Lua rocks, and then you can start using it. So I mean, as a Kong, we don't stop it. Any external library that you're using it, but then you as a customer you own managing those. So basically your security standards or whether they are Lua rocks are performant or not, that's something you would be owning it. But Kong doesn't stop you to use any Lua rocks that you wanted to use. Okay. I know it was pretty quick, but I think we are right on time, just 1 minute ahead. But is there any more questions from your side? Right. I think then I'll hand over to you, Kathleen, and then she'll guide you through where the recording is available, etc. So, Kathleen, over to you.